Hey friends, we're going to talk about Chapter 2.1, Data Models and Data Modeling. This is just kind of a short intro to the topic, and we'll get a little deeper as we go into it. So data models are all about how we are going to store data in our database. So the idea is we want to get some sort of graphical representation of what the data that we need is and where it's going to go. Right? So if we're trying to keep track of things like we talked about before, I might have a list of employees. Sorry, that is terrible there. Let's try that again. All right, that's maybe a little bit better. So if this is my employee table, I need to get an idea for, well, what are all these columns or attributes going to be for each employee? Right? I might have an ID, I might have a name. Sorry, my pen is not wanting to cooperate today. Name, and on and on and on and on. All that information we're going to track. And what we're doing for our discussion exercise is trying to kind of think through in more of a free form, hey, these are some different data elements that I'm going to need. Here's some tables I'm going to need to interact with, right? The entities and their attributes, or the tables and their columns or fields that we're going to think about. And data modeling is this process of going through and making sure we can capture all of the data for what we'll call our given problem domain. And really the problem domain just means like what am I trying to capture data for? So in this case, if we're looking at like a retail industry, what sort of data do we need to know about retail? Or what sort of data do we need to know about fast food? I mean, if we're going to do that is our data, if that is our problem domain, right? What is the pieces of information we're going to need? And to do that, right, we go through this whole process and we have to look at the different pieces of data that different people in the organization use, right? So it's not, hey, just the data that the CEO needs, right? It's not just the data the management needs, and it's not just the data that the people at the front lines need either. Right? We need to make sure we're able to capture all of the data across the whole spectrum here and fit it into our data model. And the idea with the data model is that we'll have, when we're done, a graphical representation of what the database should look like. So it's essentially the blueprint that we'll use to build the database. So we go through and we come up with all the attributes, or all the entities, right? All the nouns. These are all the things we need to have data about, some of our employees, and we might have information about our widgets, right, that we sell, and we might have information, about all of our suppliers. And this can be a really big list. Like the amount of data that any given organization needs really is a lot of data, a lot of pieces of information about lots of different separate things. And not only are we capturing that, but we're going to capture the relationship between them. So if a supplier supplies a particular widget for us, what is that relationship here, right? How does a supplier relate to a given widget? Or how does a widget relate to an employee? Maybe they're the salesperson who sells this particular widget, or this employee builds that particular widget, right? So we have to capture relationships and all of the attributes in everything in our organization. It's kind of big, and it's really an abstract way of thinking that, all right, let me try and get everything down and figure out what these relationships are. It's a big task. And so it happens kind of iteratively, where you get a little bit of information and you check it, and you get a little bit of information and you check it, you get a little bit of information and you check it. You just keep building and building and building until you're able to capture every single piece of data. And now some of that's interesting because there's ways you can capture information at different levels of detail. So if you were to imagine, hey, where you are trying to build maybe a medical record database, so I can store someone's information about their medical records. One of the things we could store is like a list of diagnoses, or these are the things that are wrong with somebody that we need to take care of. So I'm a type 1 diabetic. So I would list, diabetes, type 1, right? Somewhere in that list here. Now, it's mostly possible, and we have some interesting code systems to say these are all the possible hundreds of thousands of diagnoses any given person could have, and you just get a combination of them. But if you just give that list to somebody and they have to go find them in like some big drop-down list, it's going to be a little bit tricky. So it's easier for somebody to just get a text box here and they can just type in whatever they want. If they just type in anything they want, we're not going to get the fine granular level of detail of, okay, this is the particular diagnosis and the specific code that goes along with it here. So there's some balancing that has to be done to see, hey, how do we capture the information and at what level of detail are we going to capture it? And really, whose job is it then to do that sort of thing? So chapter 2 is very fun. and we'll get into all sorts of data modeling. We're going to do it all by hand to start, and then we're going to introduce some tools to make the job a little bit easier for us.